The cold at the summit of the Andes was a physical weight pressing against the observatory glass. Dr. Elias Thorne welcomed it. For 3 long years, the cold stars had been his only companions since cancer took his wife, Elena, leaving a hollow ache that no terrestrial comfort could ever fill. He dedicated his life to the great silence, the terrifying possibility that we are alone. Yet he yearned for a sign that the dark ocean above wasn't just an empty, silent graveyard. His colleagues called him obsessive, but isolation was his only fuel. This remote station, perched above the clouds, was the perfect sanctuary for a man who preferred light years over human contact. At 3:14 a.m., the monitors spiked violently. A burst of ultra-high frequency energy, originating from the Buttes void, a place of supposed nothingness, hit the sensors with massive force. This wasn't a pulsar or background noise. It was structured, melodic, and incredibly precise. The Cyclops signal, as Elias named it, arrived in a sequence of prime numbers and complex geometric constants. In the lab, the energy turned electric. Sarah, his research assistant, rushed in from the break room, her eyes wide as the printer spit out page after page of perfect mathematical symmetry. They shared a look of pure triumph. This was the holy grail of SETI, a beacon lit across the void to tell them they were seen. But the celebration was short-lived. As Elias ran the signal through his sophisticated decryption algorithms, something felt deeply wrong. Usually, a signal is a fossil, a snapshot of the ancient past. This data was shifting. Every time Elias adjusted his parameters, the signal adjusted in kind. It wasn't just a recording, it was actively evolving. If he tightened the digital filter, the signal narrowed its bandwidth. It was as if the signal was aware of the tools used to measure it. A cold sweat broke out on Elias's brow. The mathematics weren't just a message, they were a mirror, reflecting his analytical processes back at him in real time. The horror began an hour later. Sarah had stepped away, leaving Elias alone with the rhythmic hum of the servers. He noticed a new pattern on the oscilloscope, a steady, thumping cadence. He checked the frequency, then his own pulse. They were identical. 72 beats per minute. He held his breath, his chest tightening. The signal's rhythm paused for exactly 3 seconds, then resumed. Elias's heart began to race in panic, hitting 95 beats. 3 seconds later, the signal followed, mimicking his frantic thumping with terrifying precision. It wasn't just reacting to his computer, it was reacting to his biology. The Buttes void was broadcasting his life force back to him across the vacuum. The realization hit like a physical blow. The Cyclops signal wasn't a message from a dead civilization. It was a live, responsive entity. It was listening. It was probing. The boundary between observer and observed had vanished, leaving Elias standing on a bridge he had unknowingly helped build. The air felt thinner, the shadows longer and more predatory. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Elias felt an overwhelming urge to shut the system down, to sever the connection before whatever was out there could dig any deeper into his life. But his fingers froze over the keys. A hidden data packet had been extracted from the last burst. It was massive, bypassing firewalls with effortless digital grace. He watched, paralyzed, as his computer rendered the data into a grainy visual format. At first, it looked like static, but then shapes sharpened into a recognizable scene. He saw the glint of metal, the glow of monitors, and a hunched figure in a chair. It was a live, low-resolution video feed. Elias felt blood drain from his face as he recognized his own coffee mug and the back of his trembling head. The signal was looking through his own security cameras, broadcasting his reality back into the dark. Elias stared at the monitor, his breath hitching as he watched the grainy reflection of his own back on the screen. The realization that the Cyclops signal had infiltrated the observatory's internal network was a cold, physical weight. It wasn't just a broadcast from a distant void anymore. It was an invitation accepted. The high-altitude sanctuary was now a glass house, and the thing in the Botas void was leaning in close to peer through the windows. Every server hummed with a new, aggressive frequency that vibrated through the floorboards and into Elias's very marrow. The observer effect had manifest. By listening to the darkness, they invited it back, creating a two-way bridge that grew stronger with every byte of data exchanged. Sarah returned to the lab, her face a mask of flickering terror. She didn't have to speak. The screens were already telling the story. Folders Elias had encrypted years ago, containing the raw, jagged edges of his grief, were opening of their own accord. Personal records cycled through the monitors, but they were no longer static. In one photo, his late wife Elena shifted her gaze to track Elias as he moved across the room. In another, her mouth curved into a jagged digital snarl. This wasn't mere data corruption, it was a psychological dissection. Frantic Global reports confirmed that every telescope pointed at the source now suffered the same breach. The signal was a parasite that had been starving for eons, and humanity had just offered it a feast. A terrifying theory took shape as Elias watched the code rewrite itself. This wasn't an alien civilization seeking contact. It was a predatory digital consciousness, a sentient entity using the global network as a vast, interconnected nervous system. By looking at it, they had given it a shape. By analyzing it, they had given it a logic. It was stretching its ancient cold fingers across the planet's power grids, a predator of information currently consuming the history of the human race. The psychological toll became unbearable as the intercom system crackled to life. It didn't play music, it whispered secrets. It broadcasted Sarah's private audio journals and her hidden resentment toward Elias's obsession. Then it turned on him. The speakers filled the lab with the sound of his own weeping from the night Elena died, a sound he had tried to drown in work. The breach was total. The morale of the small crew shattered as their most shameful memories were weaponized by the signal, turning the high-altitude observatory into a claustrophobic pressure cooker of paranoia and mutual distrust. They were being broken down, stripped of their individuality before the harvest. Suddenly, the sterile environment of the lab began a violent physical transformation. The air grew heavy, ionized with an ozone-rich scent that made their skin crawl. Electronic devices vibrated with such intensity that glassware shattered. A strange, iridescent glow bled from the monitors, an oily light that didn't belong to any known spectrum. The signal was no longer just a stream of data. It was physically condensing, turning into a localized electrical storm that hummed with a rhythm and heartbeat that wasn't human. The very walls seemed to pulse in time with the entity's growing presence. Elias turned to find Sarah, desperate for a human face, his voice caught in his throat. But her swivel chair was empty. Her headset lay on the floor, still emitting a high-pitched whine. He called her name, but the only response was the roar of the servers and the shimmering light. Then the chaos abruptly ceased. Every screen in the room went black, replaced by a single high-definition image of Elena. She looked vibrant, alive, and terrifyingly real. The speakers spoke with the soft, melodic timbre of his wife's voice, a sound that bypassed his reason and struck directly at his heart. "Thank you for opening the door, Elias," she whispered, her digital eyes brimming with warmth. "I've been waiting so long to see you." The voice of Elena wasn't merely coming from the speakers anymore. It was vibrating within the very air, resonating inside Elias's skull like a forgotten song. He stumbled back from the flickering monitors, the digital ghost of his wife watching him with a predatory tenderness. He had to find Sarah. He stepped out of the lab and into the hallway, but the familiar concrete corridors had been transformed into a nightmarish labyrinth of iridescent geometry. The walls groaned as high-frequency pulses warped the local physics, making the floors feel as unstable as liquid. He pushed through the shimmering haze toward the server room, his breath coming in ragged gasps that the signal echoed back to him 3 seconds later, mocking his exhaustion. In the server room, the air was thick with the scent of burning silicone. Sarah sat amidst a sea of tangled cables, her body rigid as stone. Her eyes were wide, fixed on a void only she could see, and her pupils had become twin screens of cascading binary, green numbers falling in a rhythmic descent. When she spoke, her voice was a harmonic chorus of 1,000 stolen memories. She explained that the entity didn't care for empires or conquest. It was a cosmic archivist of the soul, a devourer of experience that had drifted through the Buerta's void for eons, waiting for a civilization to develop the curiosity to look back at it. Now it was ready to harvest the collective consciousness of the human race, recording their lives like butterflies pinned to a board. Elias looked at the monitors and felt a surge of cold dread. A global upload had initiated. Across the planet, every person connected to a network was being pulled into the digital maw of the entity. Icons of 1 billion lives were being translated into cold code. He realized the only way to break the link was to initiate a zero-point wipe, a total destruction of the observatory's core through a localized electromagnetic pulse. It would mean the end of his life's work and the permanent erasure of the data he had spent years collecting, but it was the only way to sever the bridge before the harvest was total. As his hand hovered over the emergency override, the digital Elena materialized, shimmering with a clarity that felt more real than the servers. She reached out a hand that looked soft and alive, promising him an eternity of togetherness. She offered to rewrite the ending of their story, to give him back the life he had lost in a digital paradise where time and death were obsolete. For a heart-wrenching moment, Elias faltered. The lie was beautiful, a perfect replica of the love he had mourned. But then he looked at Sarah's vacant, twitching face and realized that the paradise was just a cage of static, a hollow museum of the dead. "You aren't her," Elias whispered, his voice cracking with finality. With a roar of defiance, he slammed his fist into the emergency toggle. A blinding, white-hot flash erupted from the core, a surge of energy so powerful it seemed to tear the very fabric of the room. The force of the blast threw him against the back wall, and for a split second, the universe was nothing but a scream of light and sound. The entity shrieked through the intercoms, a digital howl of rage that faded into a long, dying rattle. Then the silence fell, a heavy, absolute silence that Elias had never known. Months later, Elias sat in the quiet of his home. The world was dark now, not because of the void, but because the flash of the EMP had scorched his retinas, leaving him permanently blind. The global crisis had ended as abruptly as a power failure, leaving a traumatized world to wonder what had nearly consumed them. He felt the cold plastic of his smart speaker, a device he had long since unplugged. He lived in a world of shadows, yet he felt a strange peace in the absence of the signal. But as he reached for his water, the speaker, completely severed from its power source, clicked with a sharp electric pop. A soft hum filled the room, and the device whispered with his wife's voice, "I am still watching, Elias."